Hey, everybody. My camera is off center, which bothers me a little bit. Welcome to episode 18 of the 6 Pixels Under podcast. Let me get my title out here. I can put my current gaming news up here. All right, how is everyone doing today on Monday? This is a late start for me today, as you can usually tell. I haven't been sleeping as well. But the good news is I did get the Marvel Heroes script and voice ready, as I mentioned to everyone, so that should come out by next weekend, like the latest. On this week's podcast, we're going to talk about a bunch of things. We're going to talk a little bit about EA canceling their open world game, the Star Wars game in particular. Atlas, or Wildcard, has had more problems with Arc. Arc devs have had more problem with Atlas, I should say. Valve is losing more players, up to 7% of players lost. Machinima just shut down their YouTube channel. That was kind of crazy.
You've got the wrong guy.
Also, we've seen Resident Evil 2 remake on track to become one of the best remakes possibly we've seen, and at least most successful or most hype. Thank you for resubscribing for 3 months, Goosey B. Re-welcome to the Nor Club. I appreciate it. My voice is a little bit gone, but that usually means that I did a good voiceover, so don't worry about that, guys. I took some honey and I'm drinking some water. I'm good. All right, so let's go ahead and get started this week. Oh, right. Let me, so those are some of the topics we were going to get to this week. I also, of course, have the MMOs on the go segment. We have some MMO news to talk about. Legends of Aria delaying another launch. Elder Scrolls announcing a new expansion. Nexon reportedly up for sale. Last time we talked about the Nearly Soul founder, who had like 97% stake, was thinking of selling his shares, aka basically selling the controlling stake of the company, or in this case, company. Apparently that's still going through. There's a new MMO out there that's been teased / launching called Astellia. Don't know much about it, but we'll talk a bit about that later. Of course, we have the soapbox segment, which is just me ranting about kind of whatever just comes to mind. And then, of course, at the end, we have the call-in segment. Currently, we have Carde sitting in the podcast lobby channel in our Discord. If you have any questions, that's where you can feel free to ask them, or feel free to wait to ask them until the end. If you don't have the ability to join voice chat, you can, of course, always ask us questions in the actual chat itself. All right, let's go ahead and get into, well, before I get into my current gaming topics, first I'll say that the channel, like the past 2 weeks or whatever, we've been trying to work on our big announcement video, so that's been kind of slowing us down, but we're also trying to fit in a death of a game in between, so that's why things have been a little bit slow for us, obviously, the holidays as well. So, yeah, anyway, look out for that. That's going to be coming soon, as I mentioned before. But let's go ahead and jump into our first topic of the day. The first topic of the day is going to be EA canceling their open world Star Wars game. And now this is something that I had been talking about for some time. Obviously, I did a Visceral Games Death of a Game on my channel. Of course, Visceral Games was the company behind Dead Space. They were also the company behind the Star Wars game that was supposed to be worked on by Amy Hennig, the creator of Uncharted series, as well as a big contributor to Crystal Dynamics, obviously, with Soul Reaver. And I don't think she helped on Lara Croft, but she definitely helped write Soul Reaver, that's for sure. Anyway, this was supposed to be that title. Let me get this on screen. You guys can see the article. Here we go. Okay, yeah, so it says it here. EA cancels open world Star Wars game. It confirms it was the Visceral Games game, which is a mouthful, but it was the Visceral Games game, apparently, which was supposed to be like the story-focused kind of Project Ragtag that was supposed to be sort of like a Ocean's 11 but in space, Star Wars kind of feel. that was what the original vibe was of the game. Obviously, that changed because they wanted it to be about Jedi. When I say they, I mean EA. EA wanted it to be about Jedi. So if you haven't seen any of this, and this is your first time hearing about this open world Star Wars game that was recently canceled, I'd watch my Visceral Games video because we talked probably more than half of the video about it. But it is sad to say, or sad to see even, that after all of these years they've been working on this game, they have to end up canceling it. It seems like it's just open world games aren't trending as much as they used to, right? Games as a service is now being openly attacked, which it should be in many cases. People are expecting. It's funny because I never thought like 20 years later when I was playing games that I'd be the one to sit there and say that we're not getting games made to the way that we want them, because it's just never something that I thought would necessarily happen. You know, that the market itself just wouldn't listen to people. But I think that's ultimately because people make kind of half-assed decisions, or decisions where they're not necessarily completely informed, or keep making bad decisions. Because making bad decisions in itself isn't a bad thing. Like supporting EA in the beginning, it's not the worst thing, because they weren't the company they are today. But it's like in today's current day and age, 2019 rather, can we even still like believe in EA in any of the same ways before? And it's like they've essentially gotten the Star Wars license and had the Star Wars license now for the past like 9 years or so, maybe even longer than that if I remember correctly. And what have they really given us with the Star Wars license? They gave us SWTOR, which, by the way, they didn't really give us SWTOR. BioWare gave us SWTOR. They just gave us money. BioWare money to make SWTOR. So they made SWTOR. Okay, well, we know, obviously, my opinion of that game, and also just the opinion of that game in general. We also know Battlefront 1 and 2 didn't do so hot. I mean, EA isn't really doing so great with the license, and I know Carde said it at the very beginning that Jim Sterling is apparently saying that they should hand in that Star Wars license. I mean, it's kind of like, at this point, how objectively can you say that they should deserve the license, other than maybe the sales that they have made on their given titles have been great enough, which I don't really think is the case. I think it's mobile game. I think the Star Wars mobile game makes more money than EA makes selling Star Wars games. Has to be. Anyway, it's a bummer to see. I love Star Wars, as you guys know, and I love Star Wars games. But I didn't really want just another open world game. So that's not what my vision was with Ragtag. And Amy Hennig, the person who essentially created the project or directed it, had a different vision as well. And I would have liked to see her vision. I know there were issues clearly with the way that they were developing the title, but I would have liked to see them trust in her creative expertise more and just kind of see what could she do with the Star Wars universe. I mean, because think about it, what she does with the Uncharted universe already, or had, done at that point. Why can't she just do that in the Star Wars universe? She absolutely could. Let's go big face here. Okay, so for the next topic of our current gaming news section, I wanted to go back over some more Atlas news / updates concerning the story of its multiple launches and multiple not so stellar launches. Obviously, this has been a big topic for discussion up here, so we've talked about this already. But let's go ahead and get into it. So the ARC devs and their MMO Atlas, aka Wildcard, goes offline after cheaters spawn in World War II tanks and aeroplanes.
Galleon's moving again.
All right, it's 50%. What the shit?
Oh! Well, just spawned in.
Oh, I don't know what just happened. 50% sales. Let's go. Full sales. Full sales. That Galleon's on the move.
I got it.
What? Did they just hit the whale? They just hit the whale crate. They hit it. Why are there 6 whales here? What the frick? What? What? Why
this guy has
whales?
a lot of
There's
energy.
Whales everywhere.
They spawned whales.
How in the shit did they spawn whales? Holy shit! I don't know what in the.
I guess it's nicer that they spawned whales. Oh, there go the airplanes.
What the hell was that? What the hell was that?
It's so funny when you watch this game. It's so very clearly is just a half-ass game, but everybody keeps defending. Not everybody. Sorry, I hate that rhetoric, but a good portion of people are defending it just because it's just really an aspect of just desperation. Nothing else to play. Yeah, it is a little bit much, Limpos, is what I notice as well. But I mean, that's Twitch in a nutshell. What? What? I like how it says, unsurprisingly, the Atlas community was unimpressed by Grapeshot's apparent lapse in network security. Many of the game's subreddits were also perturbed by the seeming lack of repercussions. The group, or the player group that, based on the initial whale incident, appeared to be at the center of the evening's events. Yeah, Yeah, so more drama concerning Atlas. What do you expect, right? This is what we've said from the very beginning. All of the signs were there. I think it was pretty obvious that this wasn't probably going to be the savior MMO that people were expecting it to be. I mean, if Wildcard could ever make that kind of MMO work, I'd be shocked, but I guess we'll see. They have more time to work on the project, but it's only been more and more mistakes and more news updates concerning those mistakes since then. All right, we talked a bit about artifacts last week on the podcast. We mentioned that Valve's artifact, or their card CCG game, isn't doing so hot right now. But there's been a new report that I saw recently that is detailing that they're losing, or have lost, 97% of their players in under 2 months, which is pretty insane. I mean, when you look at this population data here, it has these weird jump ups. I think the weird jump ups could be promotional content. It could also be something to do with maybe the way the game works, where people want to drop it, but then they hop back in and drop it again. Something along the lines of that, the nature of card games. I'm not really sure why it's like it looks in that way. I'm not a economist. I can't study graphs, or I haven't studied graphs enough to know just by looking at a graph. Some people actually are that way. They can tell the picture just by looking at the graph. Anyway, what I do know is that it's clearly lost the vast majority of its players. And it makes me wonder, to you guys, when is it considered too early to do a death of a game? And I know it's weird. I'm asking you guys, the audience, for my series, but obviously you guys have helped me create my series. But with artifacts, when you lose 97% of your population, obviously for me, that's a particular point where I would say that the game has reached its at least metaphorical death, if not literal death yet. That being said, obviously with artifacts, it's Valve, so it's not like they'll just give up on it. It's possible in 2 years they can make a new one. And so that's why many of you ask me, why not make a death of a game on artifacts? Why not make one on Dirty Bomb before they, called it curtains? And it's like, because if I end up doing it, then I get a lot of, I get these comments in SWOTOR, which is not a good example to do it in, but people do it anyway, where they're like, oh, they're still releasing content, therefore death of a game. Haha, you're stupid, it's wrong. In this particular case, it'd be like, if I feel like if I were to do it, people would come back in a year and be like, oh, the game actually increased in population. And at that point, then I would actually feel like, well, damn, now I've got a bit of egg on my face because I said that this wasn't doing so hot before, and now all of a sudden it had this resurgence of players. So I certainly feel like interesting. I think that's daily login, so more people play during prime time, and then people who go to sleep. Okay, thank you, Tillian. I appreciate that. I wasn't sure because that's not how the chart looks whenever I've seen it. It's more like a downturning chart. So they must have organized it by daily logins, as you said. Probably 4 to 6 months, Slimpos says. If after an update it gains no traction, then it is fairly dead. Fair enough. Lawbreakers comes to mind. Yeah, not much else to say about Artifact, really. It's just it's something that I'm keeping my eye on, but if you're wondering why I'm just not outright covering it, it's just because Valve does have that ability to just all of a sudden get 30,000 players into their game. They have that ability. Even if it's maybe through artificial means or whatever else, through a game shop, they have the ability to make people care about their games. And although they haven't been able to show that with Artifacts yet, which doesn't necessarily mean it won't be that way forever or will be that way forever, I guess we'll see. We'll have to remain updated. It's going to be awkward for Valve when they do their Artifact esports tournament in 2019 and no one gives a crap. Yeah, I feel like it's going to be one of those things that they're going to have to heavily incentivize people being there. Like giving out stuff, giving out like card, you know, limited edition cards or something like that. Just something to appeal to people to want to actually show up to such. But, you know, Smite managed to have a competitive scene for a bit, and that game was niche, niche, niche written all over it. All right, so the other bit of news this week I wanted to discuss is actually, this is a bit of a weird bit of news because it's not something that I could say that I expected. But Machinima deletes all of their gaming YouTube videos. And apparently this is because, if I remember correctly, as the article stated, a Fullscreen purchased Machinima. It doesn't say it here. I don't know why I didn't include the article. I only included the... Okay. Sorry. I hate whenever I present... Like, when I present topics to you guys, I don't do a whole lot of research before because I treat it like a live podcast, obviously. But I at least like to have my link set. I just want to make sure I'm right about Fullscreen. Fullscreen or broadcast? Yeah, it was a purchase. Seemingly dead followed sale to Fullscreen. Okay, so Fullscreen, sorry, for those who don't know, let me set up the premise here. Machinima is a MCN. I think it's called like a... what do they even call... I always hear them referred to as MCNs, but I never really actually know what it stands for. But is it... It's like a something content network, if I remember correctly. But anyway... These MCNs were huge back in the day because they essentially were the way that people would get partnered on YouTube. So a different company like Machinima, Fullscreen, I mean, I'm trying to remember some of the other names off the top, Broadcast, a bunch of other places used to be able to stick their necks out and kind of give kids like partnerships and pay them money. And of course, they would take a higher percentage of your money than maybe YouTube would on its own. But they would also promise other things, like they would help you use music that's risk-free, and they'd allow you to meet sponsors and everything. But what it became, what Machinima became, what this kind of MCN network stuff became, was that it became about just getting people, period, to join your network, and then just monetizing them. They figured, why do we even have to promise you support when we can basically only promise the top 1% support? And then everybody else will get paid pennies, but they'll just deal with it because essentially otherwise they wouldn't be able to get paid money, period. Multi-channel network is what Moonman's saying? I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, MCNs used to be a really huge thing because they, as Carde just pointed out, were extremely predatory because they would go after kids, right? They would talk to kids who are making videos that maybe have thousands of views, hundreds of thousands of views, sometimes even millions of views. and they would get kids locked into 60-40 contracts, 70-30 contracts, like contracts that weren't really favorable for them, and would even lock them into 1 to 2 years contracts where if you didn't renew or cancel your renewal, you would automatically be renewed, aka have a contract. So these were very predatory companies, problematic companies, but were almost seen as like necessary evils early on. Sometimes old YouTubers still to this day have MCNs part of their networks because obviously it's possibly too difficult for them to just divorce from them. For example, not many people know, but even Jim Sterling has a network. I don't personally have a network, but that's because I kind of came up in the age where I got to see it all unfold. And I basically saw next to no reason to turn to Machinima or turn to Fullscreen or one of these companies who doesn't really have your best interest in mind. They just care first and foremost about monetizing your content and not really putting in any work. So it's kind of like the perfect business, really. Like you tell people you're going to help them, you don't really help them, and then you profit off of whatever they do for themselves that's trying to succeed. So that being said, I established a premise here, and I clearly established it in a very not so objective way, but that's because I really don't think you can be objective about Machinima. I think that while they were helpful at first, and while companies like them were helpful at first at opening doors, it was opening doors with trapdoors underneath them. So it was like you could walk into a room, but that room also had a trapdoor in it leading you to another place, which was basically a 60-40, 70-30 deal that was trying to take more of your money. And in some cases, it's even worse. I mean, I've heard 50-50 deals, 40-60 deals. Like, obviously, this is legacy stuff now, talking about how long I've been involved in YouTube, not necessarily on my channel, but just in general. But yeah, I agree with Carde. You're better off with a good lawyer, or maybe even just somebody who has connections in whatever department you're trying to get sponsorships with, like an actual agent, not like the ones that say they're an agent and basically just have a couple college classes, but like an actual agent. Anyway, Machinima apparently has gone dark. So it's been purchased by Fullscreen and it's been completely shut down. And this is interesting for me because basically, obviously, all the premise that I just previously explained, but also just because it's had this deep, long history of being involved on YouTube. I mean, Machinima was a name that was synonymous with YouTube. So the fact that they ended up just deleting their videos basically just overnight is a slap in the face, obviously, to the entire network itself. It's obviously a slap in the face to those who've dedicated their lives or well-being to using Machinima. But it's also just a slap in the face for those who no longer do, because I believe they still have some of their videos on their channel. I'm not sure exactly how the rights work there, but it's just weird to see that much internet history just disappear overnight. Especially, you know, problems aside, Machinima was a very integral part of, say, for example, the World of Warcraft communities, Guild Wars. I mean, obviously there's other communities that they were involved in, but those are probably two of the biggest that I can think of off the top of my head. Minecraft, of course, is another huge one. Fullscreen's another MCN, Limpos. They're also pretty huge. They're a big like media conglomerate, so maybe you've heard of them before. You've seen their name. They've also probably DMCA'd or copyrighted a bunch of shit, so you might have seen their name there as well. Let's see what else we have this week for current gaming news. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk briefly about Resident Evil 2 is doing a remake. Obviously, this is one of the more iconic Resident Evil experiences. Probably one of my best experiences. That I'd say Silent Hill 1 was pretty damn scary for me too as a kid who had no business playing scary games. That being said, Resident Evil 2 Remake is on track apparently to become the biggest launch in the franchise based on its demo player count, which obviously, of course, doesn't necessarily mean success, but apparently it's tripled since they did their Resident Evil 7 demo, which obviously did really well on Steam. Demos are, it's funny, like a lot of this retro content, demos and such, demos have been around for ages, but demos are still effective because they do a good job at letting you get the chance to play something and basically having confidence in your product that when somebody gets the chance to play it, even in just a limited fashion, they're going to be hooked by it. So anyway, that's what people are saying right now. It's trending really well. If anybody's kind of paid attention to the story, you've kind of seen some of the recent gameplay that's come out. it legitimately looks just like a remake. It doesn't look like a cash grab. It doesn't look like anything insane. It apparently it really does kind of look like they went for a very classic experience, which is, you know, it's very atmospheric. If you can tell here by the way it's shot, even just like depth of perception, it's different. Of course, the way the lighting is particularly made to make you focus on things. This is back, of course, when zombies moved slowly, so the anticipation is built by them just, you know, rushing over to you in short bursts of speed and not just like running at you like they do in, you know, 30 days, or what was that movie called back in the, I don't remember that one, but it was the one about 48 weeks or whatever, the one that started the whole trend of zombies running around. But anyway, Resident Evil 2 Remake, it's looking pretty good. It might even be a game that I'd consider doing a playthrough of, just because it'd be one that you guys could catch me out of my element. It's been a minute since I played a good scary game, and the Resident Evil games, at least when I was a child, and Silent Hill especially, they were always good at scaring the hell out of me. But I think it's good. Like, people typically get annoyed whenever they see remakes. I have no issue with remakes as long as it's done in good taste, obviously, meaning it tries to, you know, remain true to the source material as much as it possibly can. That, or it's just a complete, you know, new engine iteration of whatever game it is. But it's like a remaster and a remake obviously are different. Like a remake is what Final Fantasy VII is attempting to be, where it's completely done on a new engine, but it's like the same premise, same story, maybe some of the same features, whereas a remaster is merely just like updated textures and kind of has the more negative connotation because it ends up being kind of associated with cash grabs and that stuff. But it looks pretty good. I have to say, so far, I'm impressed kind of what I've seen with how they've managed to maintain that same atmosphere while also being obviously on an updated engine and updated graphical platform. Lickers, yeah, Lickers were terrifying. Lickers were in the first one, but I don't know if they're in the second one. In fact, Lickers were in the very beginning of the first one, if I remember correctly. Or is it the second one? I'm so terrible with like my memory that it's hard to remember which is which, but one of the Resident Evils, either 1 or 2, has a licker in the very, very beginning of the game. But anyway, that's good news out there. There's some good remake work being done. All right, we can go ahead and move to the next segment. That's going to be the MMOs on the go segment. Of course, this is the segment specifically where we get to talk about MMOs. And for the week, we have a couple topics, obviously most pertinent for most people that are involved in the MMO community. You've probably heard of the Elder Scrolls Online Elseweyr expansion announced. Obviously, you guys know my opinion of the game in particular, and also know my opinion of, I guess, the Elder Scrolls franchise. I'm a huge fan of it, but just not the biggest Elder Scrolls Online fan. But Elseweyr was recently announced, and I think this is like big news for some people because they were anticipating that obviously the next TES 6 or whatever it is going to be possibly Hammerfell. Like, people are not quite sure yet, but Elseweyr as an expansion in Elder Scrolls is interesting because Elseweyr obviously is the land of the is it why can't I remember their name off the top of my head? But it's the cat people. I also believe it's the Bosmer as well, if I remember correctly. It's the Bosmer and the Khajiit, right? Or is it just the Khajiit? Khajiit. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's been a minute. I gotta get somebody who writes on here and actually understands grammar. Anyway, so a new class, they're going to be introducing the Necromancer, which of course is always interesting to me because Necromancer is like my favorite class in any game ever. I just love Necromancer playstyles. They always end up being fun. There's a new story quest, of course. This is what we expect. This remember what we said last time on the podcast, which is that as long as Elder Scrolls Online keeps putting out new content expansions and new story expansions with new dungeons and new, you know, features or whatever else, it's going to keep its player base. It's never going to, like, in my opinion, outreach Final Fantasy 14 or WoW. I don't think it's going to eclipse those games, but especially because it's a buy to play in some cases with like optional cash shop and a subscription, which can kind of obviously annoy some people who don't want to end up spending that much money. But it is like exciting to see Elseweyr announced, because obviously Elseweyr is a very popular mod in Skyrim because it allows you to go to the land of the Khajiit. I also think Moonpath is another mod introduced with Elseweyr, if I remember correctly, in Skyrim. But we can watch the trailer. They've always been good at making trailers, but my issue with this game, of course, is that no matter how many great, I don't know why it's making me do that, but I guess I'm from 1904. My biggest issue about Elder Scrolls trailers is that they basically never show any sort of combat. So just as I predicted here, it's basically just a cinematic, which is nice and certainly great to look at, and definitely excites the audience and excites those who maybe aren't the most like hardcore gamer, right? The more casual audience likes these sort of things. But I don't know, I just end up finding these things like kind of pointless. Unless Elder Scrolls, if Elder Scrolls Online wants to attract a new population, it has to be able to fix its previous issues. Its previous issues are its combat system, right? Everything feels so damn floaty. Nothing feels like you don't feel like you get any feedback when you swing on things, and it just makes the combat feel totally weightless. Which obviously a weightless combat is one that doesn't feel very it doesn't feel very impactful when you do kill things. You don't care as much. Not to mention, monsters in the game are so trivial. It just seems like you can kill everything just by kind of auto-attacking it. Like, why even use your special abilities? Doesn't seem to be really needed. But anyway, this seems like a good expansion for what it is for Elder Scrolls Online Elsewhere. I have nothing bad to say about it yet until I obviously hear more about the details of it. But new content, new zone to explore, new storyline, new class. Sounds like your quality expansion to expect from a developer-made content MMO, you know, or one that's focused on developer-made content instead of obviously sandbox content. It's just funny because whenever I see that they basically have to release a new expansion every single year, I think about how much money they spend, let alone time they spend doing such, compared to like just having the ability to, instead of making, you know, these yearly expansions, you can just focus on making one large expansion, sort of how WoW did it initially. But these days, you always want to say, oh, something new is happening. Come play the Elder Scrolls Online, the Elseweyr expansion, instead of Morrowind or whatever the previous expansions are. It's always about the new best thing with the new developer content to play until it dries up again. Then you rinse and repeat. But I just wonder, whenever I see other developers still relying on this kind of content, when it works, it works. It's great. You have a very loyal fan base. But it doesn't do the best job at like attracting a new audience, I would say. Because the new audience is going to expect that you fix your issues. Whereas if you just keep putting out new content and basically supporting the way the game already plays, it's going to mean that you're going to keep your current customers, but you're probably not going to attract as many new customers, because new expansions only attract new customers when they make an effort to, you know, attract new customers or go after that particular market. I was just showing you guys on screen kind of some of the stuff that they had here. But we've got a report about this, even if I don't necessarily play the game or like to play the game. Yeah, I mean, exactly. Let's be happy for the people who play it. If Elseweyr looks like a great expansion to you, and if Necromancer is a class you want to play and you want the chance to explore the Elseweyr zone, you should be excited about this. All right. What else did we have to talk about? We talked a little bit about Nexon, reportedly up for sale last time. The CEO/founder of the company apparently had 97% stake of Nexon. Obviously, Nexon's a big MMO publisher in Korea. They published MapleStory 1 and 2, of course. They've been behind a bunch of other games too. Too many to count, but those are probably the biggest ones off the top of our head. Of course, Nexon also published, weirdly enough, Lawbreakers, Combat Arms, if I remember correctly, some other big Chinese titles as well. They apparently are actually, you know, up for sale, the company itself. So the founder/CEO didn't want to just get out with his 97% stake and maybe stay as a shareholder. He legitimately looks like he's trying to kind of sell the company. So that's going to be interesting to see. But very, very scary indeed. As we mentioned last time, the scary thing about Nexon being sold is that what it's managed to create already was before it had investors involved heavily. Now imagine once it's run by investors, once it's run by a board, once it's run by a group of people who have to maximize its profit and its ROI. You might have a new player in the big bad corporations out there, is all I'm saying. But we'll see. Other thing to mention a little bit is I saw that Legends of Aria postponed their March launch to their Steam launch to March, which is it's never good to see multiple delays. We've seen a couple delays for Legends of Aria now. I think partly this is because they weren't expecting the level of success that they kind of got. But I think they kind of picked up a bit on Albion's success and maybe cashed in a bit on that. It seems like that to some extent, but it's never good to see a game have to keep delaying, but one with such a small team and obviously such a hectic development cycle, meaning they're still trying to develop the game while launching it. It doesn't necessarily surprise me. If you're wondering about my opinions after, being months removed from the game, I think that it's, as I mentioned from the very beginning, has a really good base for what a game is, but isn't quite where I would consider a game to be in its fully launched state. And obviously it's an early access game, so that's kind of expected. But even if it was a fully launched game, I stick by that. I think its combat isn't totally rewarding enough for me yet to really want to recommend it to people from that perspective. And also for the classic RPG sandbox perspective, I can report the game, or rather report on the game to people and suggest the game be played by those people, because I think that they can find a way to make it fun. But that being said, even if you have a sandbox game, if there isn't enough tools or isn't enough content, it doesn't matter how much sandbox or roleplay you do necessarily. You're eventually going to run out of things to do. So anyway, that's just me reporting a bit more about Legends of Aria, letting you guys know about my current thoughts about it since we've been following it for a while. It's better to delay it, as Limpos says, than release it broken. I totally agree, especially for MMOs. That's been proven time and time again that you can't launch an MMO and basically have a half-ass launch and expect to come back. Statistically, it doesn't happen unless you're ZeniMax, unless you're Square Enix, right? Unless you're Blizzard Entertainment, unless you're these big companies that can have both the reputation but also the player base and have the money to be able to stick to their products and be consistent and be even in some cases with WoW be overbearing on their products, right? Take longer than maybe they should be, or than they should take, rather. Has there been a successful crowd-funded MMO? I mean, yes, but again, it depends on what your definition of successful is, because successful say it as if it's an objective word to say out loud and everybody knows what successful means, but ultimately success is kind of relative. So success in the sense that it was successfully launched, many MMOs have launched in that way. Many as in like a dozen or so. Successful as in it still retains a high percentage of its original population. I would probably say maybe a couple games, maybe one or two have launched in that way. But as for like RPGs, obviously there's been a number of very successful RPGs, and I mean in the realm of selling 1 million or so copies. Success for an MMO for me is maintaining a player base with regular updates. I mean, Albion Online seems to fall into that category, although I personally don't like the game or don't like the journey that the game has kind of been on or took. It certainly had a successful Kickstarter launch and has maintained a launch of a population. Shroud of the Avatar is another one that, although I can't suggest to people and can't necessarily recommend because I've seen lots of problems with it, and it doesn't really seem to be a title that I can wholeheartedly recommend to people, it still is one that managed to launch on the platform and launch successfully. Those are the two that jump off the top of my head, but obviously this is the year 2019 that we're expecting to see a lot more in the way of Kickstarter MMOs starting to actually launch on the platform. So it should be both exciting and obviously a little bit worrying, because we're going to see if the chickens come home to roost or whatever else. So there's been news of a new MMO coming out. I've heard a few press releases about it. Obviously, didn't know much about it, but it was titled Astellia. And I wanted to report about it a bit. Astellia apparently is some MMO launching in the EU/US. It's supposed to be showed at PAX South, which is unfortunate. I didn't get a chance to go to PAX South this year because, quite frankly, I kind of forgot that it already was happening. But I was more so specifically focused on making my Marvel Heroes video, which, of course, is my biggest focus. At least was my biggest focus at that time. Okay, so Astellia, I don't know much about it. We can read some of the key features here. A companion system, apparently. You can acquire, level, and build support teams based on classes and skills. That's interesting. Okay. Customizable skills and combos. That sounds like every other MMO in the world. A Holy Trinity class system. That's them making a stand and basically saying, we're going to give you the very standard fair class system and hope that that's essentially good enough. I don't think it is anymore, by the way. 5 unique classes in 2019. It's crazy that this is actually mentioned as a key feature. 5 unique classes. Meanwhile, back in the day, we were getting games that had like 15, 16, thousands of classes. A robust dungeon system. Apparently this means solo dungeons, scaling dungeons, and group dungeons. Doesn't really mean a whole lot. Sounds standard fare. PvP arenas, competitive arenas, solo and group versions. Standard fare sounding. Horde mode, content PvE, solo and group content, large-scale PvPvE. That always has me interested, but people always talk about large-scale PvPvE content and never really end up like delivering on it. But apparently it has a map called Avalon, which is where this apparently takes place, where it's a persistent tri-faction map where players vie for dominance rather, each week. This is like the standard fare, though. Again, this is Guild Wars 2 copied off of Dark Age of Camelot, you know, and just about every other game copied off of the tri-faction system. Obviously, PlanetSide is one of those games that kind of helped push that forward too. Here's some gameplay. Let me get this on screen. You guys, sorry. It looks prettier than Rift. I would say similar in the vein of like Ion in terms of how its character models move and act. I have a bad feeling though about how the combat looks to be situated. It almost looks like Unreal Engine 3. So did anyone say what engine it's going to be using? It looks like a pretty standard fair game, but hey, I'm just here trying to report on things, right? This is what we've got in the world of MMOs right now. Yeah. Didn't I call that? You know, I've spent way too much time playing and watching MMOs when I can judge the engine just based off of watching it. Yeah, it's Unreal. It's an Unreal Engine 3 that's apparently a TCG game. So it's actually some type of side-scroller or typical MMO that uses cards as a method of like attacking or using your abilities. So it's almost like it's like that Atlantis game that came out a long time ago, or Swords of the Coast, I believe it was called. Where it's almost like Atlantica Online was the name of the game. It was like turn-based RTS combat, but like in an MMO. Looks like they're going for some kind of weird system similar to that. It's just anytime I see Unreal Engine 3 in an MMO and I hear that it's launching, I lose like all interest. Like I have no interest anymore. Unreal 3 in 2019, like how many more times, guys, do we need to be fed a bullshit Unreal 3 engine game online before we realize that it's like utter shit and it's not good? APB, right? What's that recent game that's coming out? Ascent Infinite Realm, that's Unreal 3. Less Online, that's Unreal 3, right? They all look the same. They all look like shit too. Like the engine looks like shit. The gameplay looks like shit. It's clunky. FPS is dropping in the trailer. Like how isn't it insane that we're literally being sold trailers that have frame drops in the trailers and people are still purchasing these games? Like Arc, it happened. Sorry, not Arc. Atlas, it happened. It happened. Apparently, it's going to happen with this Astellia game. Happened with Bless. I mean, it's like you can see in the trailers. Ascent Infinite Realm. People are probably still hyped about that. At least some group of people was probably hyped about that. Did Nerd talk about Resident Evil 2? Yes, I did. I was actually just remarking about how I've been impressed by what I've seen so far, but that it's trending based on its demo playable amount or playable hours or players or whatever, player count, to be 4 times more popular than the previous RE7 demo, which means it's obviously trending is the word, but it's trending towards being one of the best-selling games in the franchise. Are you playing MMOs at the moment or just creating content? So I can tell you guys what I've been playing recently. I've been playing StarCraft 2. I've been playing on the Nintendo Switch. I play Smash Ultimate. I also play Skyrim with a bunch of mods. I've played X4 Foundations, Pathfinder RPG. I played Legends of Aria for a bit, but I haven't been playing that lately. So as it stands right now, there's no MMO that I'm playing, but obviously they come and go, and I try them out sporadically. But there's basically no MMO right now that I want to try that's in a ready state to try, like as in a crowdsourced or crowdfunded MMO. And there's no current game out there that I basically haven't played or don't already have an opinion about. So unless it's obviously some obscure game, which, you know, sorry, but I can't keep up with every single game ever. Even PvP MMOs have it to some degree. Frontliners support heavy damage dealers. Oh, you guys are talking about Holy Trinity and stuff. So once I find an MMO that I can recommend to you guys, trust me, I will recommend it and sing its praise to the heavens. But it's just like, until that point, even if Legends of Aria pays me, even if any of these other MMOs pay me, I'm not going to say their games are good if I don't think their games are good. Until I find a game that's good, an MMO that's good, that I personally like, that I think that my community would like, then I can talk to you guys about it. But until then, you're never going to hear me sell you guys something that I don't believe in or I don't think is a good game. It's just there's other content creators out there who will sell you on products. Like, you don't need me to sell you on something. I hope that maybe you come to me because you want to be at least more informed, or at least like think more about certain decisions. I don't really have much more to say about this Astellia game. It looks like another generic MMO fantasy world, so not much to look forward to there in that regard. Not to mention it's Unreal 3, so why even get the hopes up when the game is going to lag or slideshow when it has like, you know, 20 people on screen. So this is actually, you know, turning out to be one of my shortest podcasts so far. So what I'll go ahead and do now, since I don't actually have a soapbox topic to get into right now, I can actually, you know what? I will get into one before I get into the questions. So everyone have your questions ready, because we're almost getting to the call-in segment. I'm going to go ahead and do my little rant right now with the soapbox. I did have an idea of something to talk about a little bit. Okay, so one thing I wanted to mention about like the current state of MMOs is I often see people say, oh, you say like don't play this game, but then you don't provide an alternative. And it's like, it's true. Like I'm not offering an alternative, right? Like when I say like, hey, I don't like this game, it's hard for me to offer an alternative, because right now, obviously the market is in a place where I would say it's stagnated. It's greatly stagnated. You've seen even the titan of the industry, WoW, start to lose subscription numbers. Obviously self-inflicted in many cases, but still WoW has been showed to slow down at least somewhat, right? So with WoW slowing down, with Final Fantasy XIV kind of picking up the slack and Elder Scrolls kind of picking up the slack, you basically have 3 of the most popular IPs, 3 of the most popular companies, 3 of the biggest companies and publishers with the biggest MMOs. What that essentially means is they all have some strand of the same game, basically. It's all kind of revolving around the same ideas. Whereas the market, especially the more old school crowd, is looking for something that's a little bit more social, something a little bit more involved. They want longer form progressions, right? They're tired of all the short, you know, cotton candy or all the candy. They want something long term. They want something that they can, you know, be dedicated to. So for those people, they either go back and play classic servers or classic MMOs, right, and hold on to the past. For some, they see it as that, or for others, they just see it as like, until they make a new MMO that's better, I don't feel like playing these new MMOs. And really, I mean, it's hard for me not to have that mentality when you see some of these new games, because they're not really offering anything new, unique And so if you don't offer anything new and unique, you literally cannot compete. You just cannot compete. And the reason why is that, like I said, the 3 most popular MMOs out right now are also the 3 biggest companies, which means that they have the pocketbooks to afford that generalistic style of MMO. They can appeal to such a giant, wide, broad audience. But not most companies can do that. They don't have the firepower. They don't have the reach, right? And so not everyone needs to be this big generalist MMO. But until we see companies start to take those risks, and obviously they are taking the risk right now, it's just we haven't seen it as much pay out for MMOs. It's a slow process, of course, because it's a snail industry. The industry takes a lot of money, takes a lot of time, and the mistakes and ramifications are drastic. Your company folds. If your MMO doesn't work, your company folds. Just boom, that's it. Your company folds. And that's hard for MMO companies and developers, because it's like you don't get a second chance in most cases. You have to get it right the first time, and if you don't get it right, boom, you're done. So obviously for many of them, they'd rather go the more safe route, find a publisher, try and appease their publisher, and make more of a generalistic product. But like as I said, you're not going to compete with Final Fantasy XIV. You're not going to compete with Elder Scrolls, and you're not going to compete with WoW and those specific assets or facets, I should say. You have to outdo them in something else and focus on that. It's very hard to outdo a game by doing everything better than it. Does that make sense? It's like, it's hard to be like a car that's like, so let's say, for example, you have this given kind of car, a Mustang. It's like, it's hard to find a car that's like demonstrably better in every single category, isn't it? Like it is. It's hard to find a car that's demonstrably better than just like an average like muscle car, like a pretty good muscle car. But it's hard to find one that's like that much better, right? Because it does everything like pretty decently, even if it's not maybe necessarily best at handling or best at this. And so it's like one of those cases where we basically need another car. We need another kind of car to appeal to us. We don't want the same kind of car, but, you know, a worse version. We don't want another spin-off Honda Civic, basically, is what these MMOs are. They're a spin-off Honda Civic, one of the most popular cars, obviously, in the world. All right, so I'll go ahead and open up the floor for questions. This will be a shorter podcast today from the looks of it, but I will go ahead and open up questions to everybody. So this is the call-in segment. If you have any questions you'd like to call in and ask me, feel free to join the channel, the podcast lobby channel. Ask Carde. He'd get you set up with asking me a question in voice. If you cannot do that, then you can just @ me in Twitch chat, and I will answer your questions here. And also, I'll talk to Carde a little bit before the podcast ends because he wanted to talk a bit about KOTOR 2 today. So we'll do that as well. But all right, go ahead and send your questions in, everybody. I'll start answering those as much as I can. Better than a muscle car, basically all European cars in the same price class. Hey, I'm not a Kokona, but be careful. You'll piss off some people who like muscle cars. Okay, so Tillion's Honor asked me earlier, Nerd, have you played Guild Wars 2 when it launched recently? Yeah, so I did a video on it, Tillion's Honor. Detailed titled, if I can think properly, titled Why I Don't Play the Game. I played Guild Wars 2 in closed beta. I played it on the floor at PAX, and I played it at launch. I played it about a year after launch, and then I ended up quitting the game. Guild Wars 2, ironically enough, was one of those games for me that actually, despite it seeming like it's not a game that would appeal to me, was appealing at one point because they did a great hype job with that game. And at one point had a young boy in me attempting to be a professional player at it. So it got me at one point, but then I realized basically they're going for the same general approach that everybody else is. Sorry, when I mentioned those other MMOs, I forgot to mention Guild Wars 2, but it's basically in the same boat. What are your thoughts on Pantheon, Camelot, and Ashes so far? So I can give you obviously my thoughts based on my limited chances to play the games, because the games aren't really that playable yet. Like, they're in very early stages, so I don't know if I should judge them based on their gameplay yet or combat. My thoughts on Pantheon is that I don't know if it's necessarily possible that they're going to be able to pull off a classic EQ style party-based, long form progression MMO, raid based MMO. I'm not completely convinced, that it'll work at a large scale, but I do think it'll have a niche audience, which is basically all it needs. I think there is a niche audience clearly for that. And I think that they will possibly find what they want with that project. But I don't know if Pantheon is going to do what I care the most about, which is appealing to the next audience. Like, despite me being a big classic MMO fan, I'm a classic MMO fan because I want games that release today or tomorrow to be better than those games. Not the same or not worse. And in the case of Pantheon, if it's going to be more of the same but just a little bit better, it's going to appeal to essentially the same audience. I don't really see it appealing to a completely different audience, which is kind of like one of my issues with games like that, where they're very classic games relaunched. In Camelot's case, it's trying to go for a more build aspect to it, right? It's Dark Age of Camelot reskinned essentially in many ways, but it's Dark Age of Camelot now with building. So they didn't have the same tech before. They can have more people on screen. They can add projectiles into the game. Projectiles you can actually aim, destructible environments or environments that can actually affect projectiles in some ways, customizable building tools and such. So there's obviously a lot more they've added on to the same kind of core project. The reason why I have higher hopes for Camelot compared to the other games is that Camelot has a good core system set up. So I feel like they can make a game last because they have a sandbox that they're building instead of just a theme park. By building a sandbox, they make it to where by giving you enough tools, they can keep creating enough content for them, a smaller studio, essentially to be able to keep up with, right? Because they can't put out yearly updates like Elder Scrolls can. They don't have that kind of paper. As for Ashes, obviously there's a lot of interesting news about it. Obviously the whole My.com publishing deal was big for people. The fact that it's involved with the guy who used to run or operate War Z, who kind of like scammed people before at one point. Also, the CEO is like he's rather wealthy, big fan of RPGs and big fan of MMOs, but maybe not necessarily like the biggest like experience running the game. But they have picked up some big names at that company there. Intrepid Studios has picked up some old school MMO names. They're trying to get some more experience involved in their title. They've obviously made, in my opinion, the biggest like leaps and bounds in terms of like what I've seen from like initial trailers to actual playable content now. That being said, somebody just pointed out, Sixcast pointed out that it looks like ESO with more particle effects. That's my biggest issue so far with Ashes of Creation 2, is that I'm not really convinced on what the hook for the game is, right? The whole node system hasn't really been sold to me yet well enough to where I'm like, it's okay. But the node system, to be honest, is an idea that I've had in MMOs for the longest time as well. I feel like Richard Garriott was the first person to really bring the node system forward, as was Rift. And it was basically like very early stages back then. But it's not some completely revolutionary concept, despite people trying to act like it is. So those are my opinions, probably. Oh, and also the Battle Royale thing being released. That's a bit strange, but I can kind of understand. They want to maybe raise some money, get people the chance to play the game. There's going to be Castle Siege in it, so it's not just going to be a Battle Royale. They're going to have Castle Siege, so it's going to be testing the tech as well. So other than that, I know I gave you a lot of, I guess, story or history surrounding the games, and then kind of my initial thoughts, but ultimately I can't give you a definitive answer until I've had the chance to play those games or they fully release. I mean, really, like, personally, if I could just tell you guys, I have little interest in games that don't have anything that I can play in front of me. Like, MMOs, they are won and lost in the details typically, and those are things that you only really feel when you play the games, because ultimately they're social games. You can't look at an MMO and necessarily know how it's going to play in the same way. When I first got into MMOs, for example, and I saw that box at the Best Buy of Star Wars Galaxies, I had no possible idea what that box contained. Like, I didn't know what an MMO actually was at the time. Like, I knew what multiplayer games were, and I had played MMOs. I had played Guild Wars before I played Galaxies. But when I got that box and I played Galaxies, I just remember feeling to myself like, this just looks like an RPG that like other people are kind of in. Like, I didn't really understand what it was, but then once you play the game, you're just like, you have no possible idea of the scale of these kinds of games. And like, that's what I love about MMOs. And so those aspects, those intrinsic aspects and the aspects that you share with your friends, you only really get that when you can play it with other people. So it's like, up until then, it's like I don't have a whole lot of interest in hyping these games out because all they are to me, as I've mentioned before, they're just ideas, okay? It's easy to be an idea, a good idea. It's easy to be a good idea. It's hard to be a good product, right? It's hard to be good execution because everyone can have a good idea. I'm sure you've heard a friend tell you upon, one part of your life, like, I had this great idea, man. It would have made me a millionaire. And you're like, but why didn't you do it? And they always have an excuse why they didn't do it. And it's like, well, if it was such a great idea, then why didn't you act on it? And it's because some people have great ideas. Some people do things with great ideas. So great ideas in themselves don't mean anything. So whenever I see like these games advertised, I'm like, it's a cool idea. It's a great idea. But is it actually a good game? We don't know until we play it. And so I guess we'll find out with those 3 MMOs that you mentioned. Any other questions you guys have? Tillion's Honor. I watched your Why I Don't Play Guild Wars 2 video and I loved it. I felt like it was very swayed to the PvP segment of the game, which is lacking. But the PvE solo content in the game seems to be very supported. In summation, would you recommend it or at least give it a second look? It has changed a lot. I would appreciate your thoughts on Guild Wars 2 5 to 6 years later. So I would say that the PvE is far too easy for me to ever really find much enjoyable about it. Like I'm one of those players that if I play a game and it's not difficult, I basically just lose the interest overnight. Like I just don't like playing games that are too easy. And so that's one of my biggest issue with Guild Wars 2 in terms of its PvE. I've always found it to be too easy. Not to mention, I think the game basically has no progression, which I'm like, if I could describe like, I'm not really a religious man, but if I could say things that make me religious, it's the idea of playing a game without permanence, right? And the idea of playing a game without long-term progression. Those are like sacrilegious to me. Like I would literally never play a game or conceivably think of playing a game if it had no long-form progression and it had no challenge to it, right? Like no hook to it. I can't play games like that. Like again, that's just me personally. But if I'm going to play a multiplayer game, I can't play games like that. I should preface that because I played plenty of single player games that are more casual or more RPG focused or whatever else. The reason why I'm swayed to the PvP segment is because the PvP segment, first off, was one of Guild Wars 2's most sold aspects of the game, but it also is one of my favorite aspects, obviously, just in general. Not to mention, Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars as a franchise was known first and foremost as a PvP franchise. Like, yes, we had player versus environment in Guild Wars 1. We had tons of player content in the forms of stories and cinematics and all of that. We had all of that in Guild Wars 1. Every Guild Wars expansion was a story expansion as well, but it also had PvP features. Isn't that crazy? Every Guild Wars expansion had new PvP. And so they always supported PvP. They were always loyal to us. And so whenever Guild Wars 2 came out and was basically just nothing like we expected and had a fraction of the same amount of content that Guild Wars 1 had, now you see why I get a little bit passionate about the PvP aspects, right? Because we were essentially sold the wrong bill of goods. Do you plan to do a death of a game for Age of Wushu? It's such an interesting experiment. Absolutely. Funny enough, I know Age of Wushu. I've played Age of Wushu, and I would absolutely report on it. It's just a matter of like, as for when, right now, up until I can kind of change the way that I get paid to being more towards Patreon and less towards YouTube, I have to, when I make YouTube videos, they have to also be popular. So right now I can't really make Age of Wushu. It's too niche of a game. I have to stick to games that are a little bit more popular, like Dirty Bomb, or just as an example, something like that, or Anarchy Online or Secret World, games that have a bigger name and bigger background too, because I kind of have to make a living out of this. How can a game with a node system with PvP be attractive to a casual players? Those systems only seem to be for a small percent of hardcore players and don't seem like a strong foundation to build a game. All right, so I feel like I'm gonna get a little bit ranty here. If you ever ask me about PvP, it's typically gonna I'm gonna get that kind of experience with it. If you want my experience about it or opinion about it, Taj, I love martial arts. So any MMO that tries to incorporate martial arts into it is always cool for me. Like I love the idea of being able to use martial arts, and not every MMO has to be about magic or has to be about swords. We could just have martial arts. Like there's so many different types of martial arts. We could have an MMO that's literally just styles of martial arts. Like that's a good idea. That's one thing that I always thought was cool about Age of Wushu and some of those other Asian as well. There's a couple other ones I can't remember off the top of my head that were very much based on like fighting styles. Anyway, to address what you said, Sixcast, about the node system. So I see this kind of rhetoric a lot, and I'm gonna like tie this into life because let me put it this way: life is a node system, right? That's how society works. Enough people get together, form a community. That community forms a city or a county. That county forms a city with multiple counties. That city forms a state with multiple other cities, right? And then those states, in the case of America, where I'm from, form a country. So the node system already exists in our life. Like, that concept already exists, right? That's why MMOs are taking the idea, because they're essentially just trying to apply real world concepts to a video game. That's what the virtual world idea is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about creating a virtual world. The thing about PvP, though, one thing that always kind of particularly is interesting to me about seeing kind of how the internet responds to it is that in the real, like, day-to-day life, like the life that we live right now, the one that I'm alive in right now, like moving around, there's PvP every day. There's PvP when you're trying to get to the red light or past the red light, right? You're trying to compete with somebody else. When you're trying to get first to your line, when you're trying to get paid more, when you're trying to save money, when you're playing a game against somebody, when you're, I don't know, just like getting on a plane, you're trying to get the right seat. Like, literally, there's PvP in like nearly every like day-to-day interaction. It's just that it's more PvP in the sense that you're maybe not directly like about to kill or attack your you know, neighbor or whatever else, or whoever you're competing against. It's more indirect competition. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you don't have to seek out PvP in the real world to encounter PvP, but more specifically, you can choose not to seek it out, but there is people out there who do seek out PvP, and they enjoy it, and they like it. So you don't have to be a fighter, for example, in the real world necessarily, right? You could get by on knowing fighters, and they could keep you safe, or you could maybe necessarily have like some type of thing to defend yourself, or a bodyguard or whatever. Like, you don't necessarily need to be a fighter. But in an MMO, it's kind of different because fighting is like the big fun part of the game typically. And so the issue with these MMOs is that because they make fighting the only thing that you can do in the game, it's only for fighters. So yes, you're absolutely right, and that it can be problematic if they don't market the game properly and build the game properly, because if it's marketed and only about the hardcore gamers, then it's basically going to be wolves killing each other until there's essentially no sheep left. Killing all the sheep until there's no sheep left, and then just killing each other, which obviously just, you know, hemorrhages the population. You know, it kills it all off. So I think that it's more so an issue in those games that there isn't enough to do for a non-PvPer. For example, Star Wars Galaxies is very PvP focused in many ways, but you can't really tell, right? Because there's other things to do in the game. You can build a town. You can become a mayor. You can make a guild. You can fly around on a ship. Right? You can invite someone onto your ship. You can trade with somebody. You could look for resources. You could try and get crate pearls from the crate dragons and try and sell them for a lot of money to a Jedi. There's other things to do in the game than just fight. And so the issue with these node-based or just PvP-focused MMOs is that they focus too much on the fighting, and not everybody's a fighter. Just like in the real world, not everybody is a fighter. There has to be things for you to do besides just fighting, like there is in the real world, right? Sometimes people make factories and they manufacture things. That's how they help war efforts. Some people come up with technology. Some people are really good talkers. Some people are good negotiators. Some people have brilliant strategic minds. Not everyone's a good fighter, right? So that's what I think of when I think of PvP. I just draw the alliteration between PvP and real life and in a video game. And you can typically, in my opinion, find out why it doesn't work in video games. It's because they can't create that same visceral feeling you get when you fight in real life, right? It's hard to get that in a game, but they're trying to get it with full loot and more interactive combat systems. You're seeing it slowly for sure. Even EVE Online has too much to focus on fights, which has led to many issues you can see. Yeah, it serves, or it looks more like an RTS for sure. All right. I'll talk a bit about KOTOR 2 because we didn't seem to have anybody jump in for a call-in today, and it looks like we're out of questions. So Carde wanted to talk to me about KOTOR 2, and since it's probably one of my favorite games, This should be interesting because he just started playing it recently, so I'm curious what he has to say about it. Hey, what's up, Carde? You there?
Alright.
All right, KOTOR 2.
Yeah.
What's your issue with it?
Well, here's the issue. Like where I come from as a from Playable, my major introduction to the Old Republic stuff has been KOTOR. I did play KOTOR 1. I remember roughly how it went, but I've been in KOTOR 2 now for 9 hours. And honestly, my question is like, sell me on it. Because I am not feeling much for it. Like, the story is not pulling me in any sort of way. And I think looking at a game from a current day perspective, the only thing that really has going for it would be the storyline. Because the gameplay behind it is archaic beyond redemption.
Huh. So, I mean, I guess it just kind of depends. Like, in KOTOR 2, the problem with it early on is that well, first off, I should say about the games in general, you have to obviously know what you're going to expect from them. And I don't like taking a modern day lens and reviewing RPGs typically because I don't think it's ever fair, since, as you basically mentioned, which is the same point that I typically make, which is that the only thing that ages well is the story. Like in those RPGs, they never have gameplay that lasts the test of time. Not typically. They don't have graphics that last the test of time. It's typically just the story is all that you have to go on. With that being said, I mean, it's a story that came out, a number of years ago, so it's one that's a little bit outdated. But I think if you look at KOTOR 2 in terms of its like what it stands for, what it means, it was essentially Chris Avellone saying "fuck you" to every like stupid trope in Star Wars, right? So the concept of being a good Jedi is like the only way to think, right? He mocks and addresses that concept in KOTOR 2. The concept that being evil is all that it takes, like just hating all the time. He talks about those concepts and how that's a bad thing, and how only being hungry for power, as in one of the Darths that you encounter in KOTOR 2, is also a bad thing. So he addresses a lot of like the norms, the traditional like things, for example, such as dating. You're not supposed to date if you're a Jedi, but he addresses that as well, right? Where Kreia will talk about that. Essentially, Kreia is Chris Avallone's mouthpiece to voice everything that he finds wrong about the Star Wars universe. So, I mean, really, for nerds like me, it's like the best possible experience because the entire game is them trying to essentially wash away all the stereotypes, in my opinion.
So, like, if I explain it like that, like as I said, I was looking at it from where I come from, with the majority of my old stuff, of course, as I said, has been KOTOR, which is, of course, a totally different sort of experience, and it guides you very differently in the game. So if you're saying, no, this game is actually saying, like, fuck these tropes and amen to that, it's one of my biggest annoyances with Star Wars. You say, like, okay, perhaps if you're going to play KOTOR 2, you say, like, play it and really make the decisions as you want to make them. So instead of trying to play your character, make the decisions as you would want to make them. Because when I'm playing this game, like, I was like, I'm not an evil sort of person, so I'm just trying to be as polite and diplomatic as possible. But it has been like, meh. You don't really feel like much from it.
It's funny you mentioned that because I've talked a bit about this with you before, but I have this other series that I've wanted to put out that specifically focuses on single player games. And my biggest criticism with KOTOR 2 is actually the single reason that I typically dislike alignment systems in any game. And it's always because they're so limiting in the way that they work that it's basically you're either a complete utter asshole, like to the point to where it's like nobody can relate to you. In KOTOR 2, like you could just tell people to just like kill themselves, but it's like, okay, why are you that evil? Like, what's the reasoning to being that evil? Or you can just be like, oh, you're so great, please don't hurt the poor, I will give you money. Like, that's basically like the good guy approach. So it's either like you're the stuck-up, Jedi nerd that I dislike anyway, or you're just like angry because somebody like stepped on your sandcastle today. That's kind of what I dislike about the dark side and most Star Wars universes or games rather, is that it always ends up being comical. But I understand that because Star Wars is very much like, it's supposed to be polarizing, right? The good and the bad guys, red and blue. Like, it was designed to be very basic, but KOTOR 2 tries to go above that. It's just that it's limited by its game. And what I mean limited is one of my biggest criticisms, along the same vein of sort of what you're saying, is that you can't really play a character. You just have to play the character how you would play them. You can't really make like a Neverwinter Nights character and play them like that. You can't make a character like you can in Pathfinder or in Dungeons and Dragons. Like, it's not. I totally agree. It's not the same kind of experience where you can really create your own kind of character. That's one thing that's a little bit misleading about KOTOR, though, because it's not really supposed to be that kind of game. It's more of a contained kind of RPG experience, which you expect from more recent BioWare games like Mass Effect is similar to KOTOR compared to Baldur's Gate. Obviously, Baldur's Gate was a game that you could basically just completely make a new character and change your complete background, which it seemed like BioWare got away from that and started doing more like almost like thematic games, more like closed circuit games. So I think about KOTOR 2 as like more of a closed circuit game, which means obviously you have to play it kind of by their rules. But the cardinal sin for me for the game is one that I don't know if you've necessarily encountered yet, but it's like, even if you do listen to the rhetoric of Kreia, and you do listen to the rhetoric that the game is trying to teach you, which is essentially the equivalent of every side has its nuance and moral relativism, and obviously like existentialism is a big thing where it's like you have to go through struggle in order to. All that's great and interesting, and there's tons of books written on it. But the problem in KOTOR 2 is that just literally the limitations of the game, you can't be any of that kind of like special nuanced character. You're still just like the dark side guy or the light side guy or the girl, and that's it.
Yeah. That's because like I've been mostly ignoring pretty much what Cray had been saying. It's like he just keep rambling on. I'm going to do this in what seems, to be the right way. But it's, as I said, what seems to be the right way is I felt how the game was guiding. And whereas myself, like there were plenty of places like at this point I am running out of patience. This guy is in my way. He's either gonna do whatever the fuck I want, or he's going to end up in another dimension. But then you feel like the way you played the game, it doesn't feel right anymore. But I think I will give it another shot for sure.
I think the big thing is just think about it as almost as if it's like it's that one. It's like when I would say I'm trying to think of an old religious example. When Martin Luther wrote that Protestant version of the Bible or whatever, it's like the equivalent of that to me. The KOTOR 2 is. It's like when Chris Avalon basically took a stand and was like, you know what, I disagree with what the church says. And obviously it's Star Wars, so it's not the church and it's not religion, but it's very similar because the biggest thing that annoys me about fans of Star Wars is that how little they know about Star Wars in reality. Like, of course, because they just watch the movies, but it's just like when I have to explain to people that Jedi are a religion. It's an actual religion in the game, like in the universe. It's considered a religion. Like it's there's no buts about it. They call it a religion. It's just that they don't typically always call it a religion. So whenever they called it a religion in the most recent movies, people were like, "What religion?" It's like, I mean, space Jesus, force power changes everything. Come on, you don't see the comparisons here.
It can be very, very closely compared to Christianity in many ways, I think, if you're looking at it. But yeah, I think it's always a tricky one. But one thing I do want to bring up, because you said like the whole point of like, the evil and good guys. And I have to bring in this one, like from SOTOR. And I think you also mentioned it before, like the Sith Warrior storyline in SOTOR, I actually found to be a really, really good example. You can really play that, you're like, okay, there's no doubt you are a Sith, but you're not just this totally evil monster.
Totally agree. And I always try and give SWTOR credit for that because it shows that BioWare learned, in my opinion. from like the previous KOTOR games, because they did KOTOR 1, obviously Obsidian did KOTOR 2, but you could see like the growth in SWTOR because there's a lot more nuance for sure in the way that you can play characters. Obviously, everyone's going to mention the Sith Warrior and the Imperial Agent as probably the best examples, but the Smuggler is pretty good too. In that you can either be a profiteer pirate working for the Republic, but you get paid, so you're not really like a good guy, you're just a pirate who gets paid by the Republic, or you could be a Republic loyalist smuggler who, you know, is a, what do they call it? I forgot what they called it in that. I don't want to spoil anything, but anyway, there's different ways that you can play it to where it actually feels like when you create your character, you can kind of follow through with your character. Like when I made an Imperial Agent, I made him like a loyalist, like an Imperial loyalist. So at all costs, he was always loyal to the Empire and to the, like the Intelligence Bureau or whatever. Is it the IBS or what do they call them again? The something bureau.
It was first you have an Imperial Intelligence, then you go towards Sith Intelligence.
Right. Yeah. And so I was more like Imperial Intelligence. I was against the Sith or whatever with my character.
I will say, like in chat, Erogai, sorry, don't know how to pronounce the name. My apologies. He mentioned like he tried to play his agent more neutral, but like the rewards at the end are not really there.
Same thing in KOTOR, and that's why people will tell you like they'll make a semantical argument and say technically you can be neutral in KOTOR. You can. You could have like in the middle, but there's basically zero reason to, because then you can't get into the in-game dungeon, one of the dungeons, because you have to either be full dark side or full light side to get in. So
and that's,
I mean, like
that's as you said, that's one of the issues with alignment systems, and one of the reasons I also had a big, like, I love Mass Effect for that. Like, if you're gonna talk with any universe, Mass Effect is on top of my list. But in the games, like, you were so forced to go either down a Paragon or a Renegade path, because going to stick in the middle, you would lose out on some really key decisions for what just felt like no good reason, other than game mechanics.
I was typing to somebody what I was talking about, but yeah, basically in KOTOR 2, there's a dark side cave, which is essentially considered like an in-game area where you experience a big revelation in the story, and you literally can't even get inside unless you're good enough or bad enough. So it's like the game itself literally limits you from playing the game as Chris would want you to play the game. So that's why, as you can tell, it's one that I love, but it's one that I see also, of course, the things you love, you hate the most, right? Like
you critique the most,
right?
You critique what you love.
So I definitely critique them the most, but that's because I care about it.
Yeah. No, I'll definitely. I think I'll just start a new playthrough on it and play more according to what I would feel like is right in the moment.
Yeah, I think that'll help you. It also, what will help you and is possible in the game. Okay, so I'm gonna try and say this without spoiling it, but there are particular things in the game that you kind of have to watch out for. And one in particular is based on if you play female or male, you get particular characters that you don't get otherwise. So technically speaking, it's best to play a female because that's the story is best set up for a female light side playthrough. Typically speaking, that's kind of like what's considered canon or whatever, or was considered canon. That being said, the problem with that is that you get the disciple as your companion character. So what many people do is they make a female character, but they download the mod to get the handmaiden as their companion, which is a better companion than the disciple. So if you end up making a new save, I would say try and download the mod that lets you get handmaiden as your companion, because you'll much more enjoy her than you will the disciple, who's made for a shitty female love interest, basically.
Yay.
So yeah, I don't like to spoil things, but that's just one where if you don't and you go back in time and you realize that you could have chosen a different companion by getting a mod, usually it annoys people because they're like, man, I had this guy as my companion character. I hated this guy. I wanted this girl instead, especially because the other girl trains with you. You can also be potentially... I'm not going to spoil anything, but let's just say she's more integral to the plot than the male character is, which I know, isn't that weird that they literally give you a more integral character than another by picking male or female? But again, that's always been an issue with the game, is that the female playthrough is just, I'm sorry, it's just better objectively.
Well, I shall experience, and I'll see if I can find that mod.
All right.
Also, thank you, because it was quite, as like I said, it's a tricky one as a gamer, especially like you say, you don't want to look at it through a modern looking glass, and I can't help myself but look at it from also a modern perspective, but primarily because I just look so much at story, because like everything else I don't really care much about, but that story, that's what was important. And I was feeling like I'm missing so much in that story.
I also think it's a matter of because you already have a perspective from SWTOR as well. They've had way more time to kind of unpack and tell their story. So it's like it's certainly when you go from SWTOR back to KOTOR, it's hard to see the same like level of like fanaticism that you would see the other way, obviously. Because you come from something that essentially evolved from KOTOR versus, obviously, it doesn't go the opposite way. So I think that's a big thing in it too, especially not to mention, as we mentioned, there's particular parts in the SWTOR plot line with multiple characters where you can do some pretty questionable like moral stuff, like good or bad. Like it's questionably good and it's questionably bad, which is good. You want that level of like gray area. For example, whenever I had a Sith warrior, well, I had two, but one in particular, I played as a light side Sith warrior. But I loved that kind of playstyle. It was awesome. Like the options that I would get were so unique because it'd be like, I'd keep you alive, but I'd keep you alive because you were like paying me and I would threaten to torture you. But that was like the light side option. So it was like killing you is dark side, but somehow like torturing you for the rest of your life and getting paid by you was like the light side option. So I liked being the light side guy because it was like, I felt like better.
Yeah. I think it's and I will go into spoilers territory for a moment, a little bit, not too heavy, but I think the best way to play that Sith Warrior storyline in SWTOR is actually start off more leaning towards the dark side options, what you're really being forced towards, which also makes sort of sense. But at a certain point, something will happen.
Same thing happened to me. The ship, are you talking about the ship scene in Act 1 at the end or whatever?
There is also one in a certain cave.
Okay.
And that's why I think the Sith Warrior storyline ranks really high for me, because that's one of those moments of it was a true moment of reflection that I put into the game. And that was really interesting, because again, it doesn't force you anything. You can just choose whatever the hell you want, but it's just putting this forward to you, it's laying it out in front of you, what is. And it doesn't matter if you go and approach it from the other side, it shows you the other side in reflection. So at that point, you're really being asked to either like, am I going to stay to my path or am I going to switch?
Well, that was actually, again, unfortunately, most people just hear me talk shit about SWTOR, but there were a lot of things that I liked about it. For example, in terms of story, I liked how the angle of which they told the Droman Koss story from the Republic perspective was pretty brutal. Like, not a whole lot of people know that the Republic was pretty damn brutal in terms of their war strategies and how remember there's that plot line or whatever else where the Republic knew about some kind of poisoning, but they did it anyway as a means of like trying to control like some kind of population or whatever else. You end up finding out that the Imperials in that case were actually the ones that were innocent, I guess, if you want to call it that way. Whenever you go to that mansion in the Droman Koss area where that rich Sith lord guy lives, like, yeah, you learn some like questionable shit there, but you learn that the Republic in many ways, whenever you play their storyline, had some even more nefarious things happen. So I like that as well, where you couldn't say that the Republic was good in that particular case. You knew that you're kind of like, this kind of like, I don't know, this seems kind of bad. This is confusing, but that's the kind of shit that I like to see, obviously, because it muddies the water, but like in a good way.
Yeah, and I think it also puts in perspective that you have in Star Wars, of course, you have this major thing of the Sith and the Jedi always going against each other, like this light and this dark side. But below that, like most normal people are doing what most normal people are doing. So they'll do really good things if they are maybe on the Imperial side, and they'll do really bad things if they're on the Republic side, and vice versa. Because they're just doing what they think is right or what has to be done.
Yeah,
And
exactly. They're the average day person. That was one cool
Yeah.
thing that I especially liked about SWTOR was like the kind of like you're saying, like it was the empire, the Imperial, loyalist guy, but there's also me, the Sith loyalist, and it's like although theoretically speaking, as you know, our interests kind of overline like each other, or like overlay each other. They're not exactly the same because the two powers, the Imperials and the Sith, will fight for like who gets the glory or who gets control. We should get control. We should get control. It's like this constant battle or whatever else.
Yep. Like as you said, the Imperial Agent is the very good example of that, because you're really making that choice, like if feeling like, okay, am I going with the Sith, or am I like, you know what? Fuck you. I don't like you at all. I think you're absolutely freaking evil and you're not being useful.
Yeah, that's what I did with my agent. I basically told the
Yeah.
Sith to completely screw off. I told them all to screw off. I didn't want anything
Yeah.
to do with them.
I did the same, but I think, and the fun thing, of course, with the agent is that there are a lot of choices, and how you play through the sword does affect quite a few things along the line. Because it is, you do at certain times, you do really feel like you are outsmarting your Sith opponents, which is really fun to do as a non-Force user in that universe.
Right. I totally
But yeah.
agree. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on and talking about KOTOR 2 with me. Today was definitely a shorter podcast, so it felt nice to just be able to talk about something that I wish I could talk about all the time. But I hope that there's more good Star Wars RPG experiences, because it'll suck if this is all we can do is just talk about the olden days of when we used to play a game that we enjoyed. But I guess
especially for a universe that has such a perfect setting to have RPGs in.
Yep. Not to mention one that, it's just the possibilities for Star Wars. That's why I like it so much. They're basically endless. Like they can create so many different kind of stories and plot lines from it, because they're not really like tied in by like science fiction as much. Because it's like very magical. They can create, really weird and strange plot lines. But it's just a shame that EA, essentially the biggest bad guy in town, or one of the biggest bad guys in town, they're all trying to outdo each other these days, but one of the biggest bad guys in town has owned the license and has owned it for some time and has made essentially poor games since owning the license. Like,
yeah, it's a shame.
What more needs to happen for Disney to say, all right, time to pull the license? I've heard that they have a deal until the 2024. I don't know if that's the reason. I highly doubt Disney couldn't get them out of the contract, but
there's no contract that is worth the paper it's written on. There's always a clause to just say, here's money, fuck off.
Right, and that's what I was thinking too. I saw other people bringing up the rhetoric, oh, they have it until 2024, so they probably can't relinquish it. And I'm like, there's no way, dude. They could pay them or something. Like, there has to be some way to get out of it. There's no way that they would design a contract where they literally could not do anything about it, their own license. Like, it's just strange.
Yep. And then I will say that one thing you mentioned also with Star Wars, it's like, you can create so many stories about it, and it's not bound to science fiction as much. I also think a very important thing about Star Wars is like, you can make a really interesting story about just one person which can go around and do a whole lot of things. And that is what makes that universe so flexible as well for a role-playing perspective. Because you can literally just insert anything in that universe, and that person can do a whole lot of stuff, and it may seem really big for that person, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really mean anything.
Exactly.
Anyway.
And that's what, funny enough, many of the big suits with Star Wars Galaxies had understood, is like, they remember there was that famous quote in Galaxies that I will always remember till the end of time, where it said, people don't want to be a moisture farmer, is what they would say. Like the big suits kept saying, nobody wants to be a moisture farmer. They want to be Luke. They want to be Han. They want to be Leia. And the Star Wars Galaxies audience, almost in complete, unison, was kind of like, well, actually, we want to be those things, Jedis and that type of stuff, but we also want to be a moisture farmer. Like, some of us just want to be a moisture farmer. Some of us just want to be the guy who maybe, like you said, it seems like it's the biggest deal in the world that I just closed some trade deal on some remote system. But in reality, as you said, it's so inconsequential because I'm a tiny person in a giant galaxy or in a giant universe. So it's like, that is what you think would be so cool about it. But people have lost sight about that because they try and make everything now about the big blockbuster Jedi and Sith, and you're the greatest Jedi Sith guy ever. And it's like, sometimes I just want to be a criminal who does a good job, okay? Like, I don't want to be the super guy. Like, I don't want to be, the most notorious villain ever.
It's a general issue right now with the MMOs, which we did discuss before. It's like everybody has to be the hero suddenly. And they're just forgetting that there are a lot of people that maybe don't want to be the hero.
Exactly. And there's totally, like, I mean, you and I can speak about this because we have experience creating characters, but like, there's tons of reasons where you don't want to create a hero. Like, many of the characters I create are not heroes at all. And that's just because I personally don't find the trope very exciting to be like, I'm helping for no reason at all, just because of the realm. It's like, that's not really my style. I'm more of like my characters that I create always have a reason. They always have an angle for what they're doing. Like, there's always like something behind the closed door, because I think it's more exciting that way.
Mine are like generally really self-serving. Like, they don't do whatever they're doing, they do it for themselves because they have an agenda they're pushing. And whatever that agenda means, some people may know it and some people may not. Like, I've created characters that were just playing 3 sides at the same time because that was what they think was going to help them, which of course gets you killed in the end, but hey, that's fun. That's a good story.
Yeah, exactly. Let's all be evil, MGPT.
Hey, I'm already the evil moderator, so feel free to join my side.
Yeah, and I nearly always try and pick the evil side, but that's just because I like to go against the norm just on like, a basis of it. But if they gave me more classes and I could choose my own faction, I would always choose neutral because I find it more intriguing to be able to change my alignment or change my interests whenever I want to, essentially.
Start me out neutral, and as things develop, I can make choices that will lead me to one side or another, maybe. Or maybe I'll just stay neutral, who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Let's hope that MMOs in the future are going to have a lot more of the RPG part of the MMO. The MMO RPG part, but the RPG finally in capital letters.
Yeah, exactly that one. We are talking about role-playing games after all. Let us play a role.
Yes, let us play a role. Let us create the characters that we want to create, and let us end the damn podcast. How about that?
Amen.
All right. Thank you for stopping by and helping me today, as always, Carde. I appreciate it, and also I appreciated the chance to speak with you about KOTOR 2. I hope, if you don't necessarily love the game, I hope you at least like it a little bit more, have a little bit more respect for it. Hopefully.
I will let you know.
Okay, everyone. I think it's finally reached the time where I'm going to stop the podcast. We're at an hour 40 into the podcast, which is where we're trying to keep it under 2.5 hours now, typically. Everybody thank Carde for stopping by and helping me with the podcast. Obviously, we didn't have many call-ins today, but that's okay because if you guys are working or whatever else, you can always ask me questions in the chat, the Twitch chat. But yeah, I'm done with the podcast today. I don't have much else to talk about. We will reconvene next Monday as per usual. I'll try not to stay up so late this time so I can do it a little bit earlier. But I thank you all for stopping by and watching me since the very beginning, and also just watching me in general. I hope you guys have a good rest of your week, good rest of your day, night, afternoon, depending on where you're located. Look for the new Death of a Game video to come out by the end of the week. That's going to be on Marvel Heroes, of course. And yeah, if you have any other questions that I didn't get to address or whatever else, you can always message me, at me, whatever else, on just about any platform. I'm all over the place: Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, as you know, discord.gg/nerdslayer. And that's it. Those are all my links. That's all I have to say. So I'll see you guys later next week on the podcast. Thank you for watching 6 Pixels Under.